say or do will be held against you in the court of engineering and sales. All right, so what I wanted to cover today was some basic things around site migrations and the overall process, because I mean, one of the things that we do want to do is support site migrations in the coming year. Probably will be somewhat popular, and we should start to build better processes around it. And most importantly, I think it makes sense to make sure that sales and engineering are aligned in terms of what the overall approach is. Obviously, we'll start to refine this more, and we're going to use better tools to manage everything. But I don't think we've ever had like a single call or document to talk about like what do we do with retrofits. We've just kind of done a lot of different one-offs. So over the past few weeks, me, Colin, and Zach have all kind of collaborated on some best practices and documentation to make sure that people have some tools and templates to work off of, and hopefully make everything kind of easy, especially in the pre-scoping side for retrofits, which isn't always so clear. So what I wanted to do specifically was understand what actually makes a project a site migration. So site migration should hopefully in terms of the tools that you have available to do pre-scoping work and coordination with the client and the engineering team. We also have some new product line items to introduce for site migrations, both in terms of services and hardware, which is pretty exciting. Jeff has his mouth wide open. And lastly, I think you guys will actually appreciate this part the most, is some tips on hardware scoping, FAQs, and the rules of thumb. So hopefully that gives you guys some sense of where to get started, because I know one of the very overwhelming things is, okay, client wants to do this, okay, I got the information, I have no idea how to even approach this. So hopefully this should clarify at least a few key concepts so we can at least have a starting point. So what makes a site migration? So it's pretty basic. I was trying to figure out what criteria we use, and there's really not too much in terms of what we call a site migration, but I have some good examples of what we shouldn't consider a site migration that could come up. So the two criteria are, there is an existing legacy third-party monitoring provider on site, like DEC, also Draker, all the typical ones, and the no-name ones that might pop up from time to time. So they have their own hardware, everything's connected to that hardware, the customer has some visibility in their system. Whether it's just the meter, inverters, weather stations, any combination, at least they have some sort of hardware where they have visibility, and it's from a third party. Whether or not there's historical data, it does not make a difference. It is considered a site migration. If there's historical data that the customer has access to, or doesn't have access to, or has access to but doesn't want to migrate, doesn't matter, it's still a site migration. Some good examples of sites that might seem like they're site migrations, but we should not approach as site migrations for right now. One, sites with existing SCADA systems are a little bit of a middle ground. SCADA systems are extremely sensitive. They require a high degree of coordination. So, SCADA systems shouldn't immediately be thought of just a typical site migration project. There's a lot to consider there. Sites that have never had monitoring before, even if they're really old, it's not an existing monitored project, so there's nothing to migrate. It's just kind of a new project for us. That's why I think retrofit is almost like not a great name for this process, because it's more for migrating existing assets with regard to DAS. And then lastly, I was thinking about this, that sites with legacy inverter OEM monitoring, if there's a new requirement for the customer to add like an RGM, or they want an RGM because, they have some concerns about the monitoring services provided by the OEM, or might go out of business and they want to add things, that's almost like a new project. Honestly, we're not going to just throw a loose meter in the field. We should just ship an Elgate 360 and just treat it as a new project. So those are some examples that I thought of that are really not appropriate for this process and should just fall within the existing SCADA or DAS processes for scoping, project implementation, and execution.
So, if we get a project where some
existing expectations with regard to functionality, price, timeline, it's always kind of but always like has to be handled very well in a time-sensitive manner. And so for that reason, there's some additional overhead for site migrations right now.
Right.
Hopefully, eventually we streamline those to be more in line with us doing DAS and SCADA. But that's one of the reasons why I say if there's no need to treat it as a site migration,
Right.
let's not worry about that and just see what we can do with the existing processes. Before I actually get into the workflow, I wanted to jump ahead a little bit and talk about some of the tools and documentation available, and then we can talk about how those fall within our workflow. So we've come up with 4 different forms for sales and AE teams to use together to kind of scope out the site migration. These forms can be found on Box under the AE Process Docs Site Migration Process subfolder, and they are as follows. 1, Site Migration Questionnaire, which we'll take a look at. Effectively, it's a very easy questionnaire that covers what the customer wants to do, what they are getting now at a very high level. We also have a Site Migration Survey, which lists out all the sites that they want to migrate, what the hardware is existing on site, and a little bit of what the site consists of, so we can start to understand the logistical scope. So it's a little bit more of a breakdown than just the questionnaire. Both of these documents are really for the sales reps to use to their advantage right away. So they send them to the clients, get them filled out, and that way they don't have just a list of questions to ask. Usually just getting this directly from the client results in better data. I think maybe a little bit of a quicker turnaround time, because even before you schedule a call, maybe you get some preliminary information. And then that also serves as a great reference for AEs without you guys having to type in additional information, things getting misconstrued or misinterpreted. So hopefully those 2 documents should serve a really great purpose. The third document, which we're currently calling a site migration document, is really for the AEs to start to put together a schedule, track milestones for a site migration project or projects within a particular portfolio, and then track a lot of different metadata and other things that we need from the clients to do a good job. And hopefully keeping it in one document will organize things a little bit better than having all these things all over the place. And then lastly, the site migration proposal is a little bit of a coordinated effort between both AEs and sales, and we'll see exactly how this comes together. The site migration proposal is really just a reflection of the quote and what we're offering to the client, so it is going to be driven by sales, but engineering will have hopefully a very heavy influence and be assisting you guys in filling this out. And what I hope the site migration document provides is a framework as to what the due dates are and what we'd like to do and what information we need. So hopefully those should complement each other. So now that I've talked about the forms a little bit, at a high level what they accomplish, let me go back to the actual process, and then we'll look at the forms themselves. So the overall process is, from the get-go, obviously the customer will have a request for quote for a site migration or retrofit, whatever they call it. If it falls within the site migration guidelines, which again, is there an existing third-party monitoring provider on site, and whether or not there's historical data, it doesn't matter. It will go through this process. So at this point, the salesperson, SP, will send the site migration questionnaire and site migration survey to the customer. So apologies for the acronyms, but hopefully there aren't too many. Then once the customer returns those back with information, the salesperson will create a Salesforce opportunity, right? So far, so good, pretty standard. The salesperson then uploads the forms and other documents that we've requested in those forms, such as sightline drawings and diagrams, to Box. And then at that point, just like a typical DAS proposal or project, you would check the AE Task Ready checkbox to say, hey, like I've done my part, let's get engineering involved. So far it's very similar to what we've already implemented. Any questions up to this point?
Which folder in Box?
Good question.
Scope of work.
The scope of work folder.
Okay.
So thank you, Annie. So that's really the best place to capture a lot of the metadata that we get from the customer that isn't drawings, because obviously we have a specific drawings folder, or spec sheets. Those we can put in our appropriate subfolders, but it's a great question. After the salesperson checks the AE Task Ready checkbox, it's then really up to the AE to reach out if we need more information or if it's not complete. Obviously, at this stage, when you check the AE Task Ready box, there is an certain expectation for some information to be on the opportunity. What is the scope of work? What are we going to monitor? Things like that on the notes field, and we can begin to formalize a little bit about like how that should be organized and exactly what we need. So as long as you're capturing what you understand from the questionnaire pretty well, and you've put down some product line items that kind of reflect what you think our scope of work is or what you interpret as our scope of work, we'll be fine. And if we need any more information, we should be able to reach out pretty much immediately after you check that AE Task Ready box. Once the box is checked, the AE will automatically know to create an internal release drawing, which again is just internal, so this isn't to be sent to the client at this stage. The AE will also create that SMD, which is the site migration document, which again, if we go ahead, is to create a schedule, put together milestones, and really understand what data are we going to need to capture to start to implement this. Now, at this stage, the AE will work with the salesperson to create the sales migration proposal and update the opportunity appropriately with any new information we learn from the client or any changes of scope or reduction of scope based off of what we learned. We should be able to work with the salesperson to make those edits and finally put together the site migration proposal. And I'll show you guys an example of what that looks like. Lastly, once the site migration proposal is in the scope of work folder, we have the site migration document, we have the internal drawings, we have all the other forms uploaded. The salesperson will request, for now, this is something we may remove very shortly, but for now we will want second eyes on this, either from myself, Mike, or somebody else on the team, just a second engineer really, to say, okay, this all makes sense. We're going to approve this, or if we don't approve it, we'll say, oh, I'm sorry. If we don't approve it, we'll say, needs revision, and we'll kind of usually tell the original engineer what needs to be changed. They'll update the drawing, they'll update their site migration document, and then you guys will update the site migration proposal. So hopefully it's more of an engineering effort to clarify what we need and what we're expecting, and then you guys will just put the polish in the site migration proposal and understand what we're selling, right? Because at the end of the day, we could do that if we really wanted to, but then you guys would be totally out of the loop in terms of what we're doing, which, it's important for all of us to be on the same page. So once everything looks good, we will approve the documents and the opportunities to say, let's go to the next step, let's propose to the client. The salesperson will email the quote, proposal, site migration document, and drawing to the client. So it will be kind of a lot of documents to look through. And for that reason, especially in the beginning, we're doing a site migration with a new client, it does make sense for the salesperson to immediately schedule a meeting around this proposal, right? Maybe a couple of days after we've sent it, so the customer can maybe take a quick look before we go through it with detail on the phone. And there is some importance there because the site migration proposal will have quite a lot of detail in it, not just about you know, what are we offering, what the price is, but also what the customer responsibilities are. Usually at this stage, clients are not actively going to the site. They might have limited information. We might need to make assumptions. And those assumptions need to be listed in the proposal to say, we'll need more information at this stage before we go to the next milestone, and really like work with the customer to get this completed, right? Because sometimes documents are not fully fleshed out or we have partial information. So we want to have this proposal really be well explained to the client so that they have the proper expectations, both with regard to their responsibilities and the overall timeline, right? Because they need to know if something doesn't get delivered, that might delay our ability to actually migrate the site, right? Which should be pretty natural to understand. So once that's understood, you know, we'll move over from the proposal stage. So far we've talked about information gathering, scoping, proposal, and we'll go to what we call kickoff. So kickoff is pretty much, we've closed out the opportunity, we've sold the project, the salesperson does their thing in Salesforce. Now the AE will step in, as usual, right? So post-sales process is very much driven by engineering and project management. And so the AE will schedule a kickoff meeting with the customer pretty much to get in touch, maybe with the same folks on the original call, maybe a new point of contact, which is really more of a project manager than a procurement person or a higher level manager. And then we'll start to talk about the data that we need, what the overall schedule is, and what we'll also do is revamp our drawings, because very often after the proposal, the client will make corrections or red lines. And in our proposal, we'll say we expect some feedback from the drawings because you've seen these for the first time. Maybe they're pretty good, but let's get them to 100%. And then we'll actually call those not internal release or client release. I actually forgot a step. We should create a client release version of the drawing, but a construction-ready release. The construction, like, there's no real construction, but at least the hardware that we're supplying will be installed this way, and there should be no surprises. At that stage, we would like to set the expectation that the customer should schedule a support call with our team so that we can do all the troubleshooting with an AE. It's definitely not reasonable or a good idea to have, you know, fleet ops do support on new site migration work. It can be quite complicated. There's a lot of legacy and internal knowledge involved, and it really needs to be managed by an AE, at least during the initial install. And so once the hardware is installed, the AE will work with the field tech, if necessary, to troubleshoot, do a live data QA check, both on the Aqua Suite and the SolarNOC, to make sure that everything's coming in as expected. A lot of the time, we might be working with unusual legacy devices. There could be scaling concerns. We really want to do a good job of doing it right once, because very often these sites are not very easy to access. And so the customer's usually unwillingness to migrate the site until they really need to. Then it becomes, you know, let's get it done and let's not go back out there, hopefully. Once we do that QA, we will then either that day or the next day, if we want to gather more information for a full day, send out a closeout email to the customer to say, this is what your site looks like on the SolarNOC. These are all the measured values. This is how you log in to the client view to see the data. And at that stage, what we usually try to do is loop in the salesperson again, because pretty much immediately, if it's a site migration that the customers had existing visibility on the site, they want to immediately be able to see the site again, right? Even just like a week gone by without seeing data, people start to get a little antsy. So we can introduce to them the concept that the site is live on the SolarNOC, but then we would hand it back, we loop in the salesperson to then schedule a SolarNOC training call. And I don't think it would probably need to be immediate, and I would want to understand what your guys' needs are in terms of notice for scheduling and things like that. But at that point, we should be able to work with the client to train them on our platform. A lot of these site migrations will be with new clients, so that's why we have formalized this kind of onboarding step here, where we haven't really done that with DAS so much before, mostly because the client will kind of expect an immediately readily available solution because they've been working with the site for so long. It's really unusual for them to lose visibility. So once the training goes and is completed, this could happen before, but the customer should email us back to say they're satisfied with the live data, it makes sense to them, we can close out the project from that standpoint. And as an addition, we also have historical data services available, as you would expect, and that sort of added on after the fact. Once the customer says we're good, we will immediately start working on extracting the data from the legacy provider. The customer will do this, or we will do this. I'll explain this a little bit later. And then the engineering team will, again, upload the data, QA the data, and send an email to the customer so that they understand the historical data is available. So there's a lot of steps within that, but that's the overall approach that we're trying to take, especially with regards to the handoff between engineering and sales, both in terms of the early on pre-scoping work and sort of the closeout work. So are there any questions on the overarching workflow before we get into some of the details as to like how do I quote this out, what did the forms actually accomplish, things like that?
Nope.
Okay, yeah, so let's, I'm starting to be a little short on time. I don't know if people have obligations in 5 minutes, so let's leave the forms to last if we have time. Everyone has access to those, and I think most people have seen them before, so I don't know if we need to cover them right now. So in terms of the new product line items that we've introduced, we have 4 additional service line items, or service line items that you should be aware of. One of them is engineering services. Actually, we will introduce engineering services site migration as a separate fee. It will just cover all of the normal coordination, project management, and troubleshooting, and live QA of data that you would typically expect. So there will be a service line item for engineering services site migration. Now, this particular fee will be very similar to our DAS standard fee. So, I do need to work a little bit with Zach and Perrin and others on what that cost should be. But the overall idea is that with any project, even a site migration, we should have an engineering services fee. In addition to that, the way we've broken down historical data migration is a little different. So you will still have the typical fees for live data that you would for DAS, but now we're going to also have a better way to do historical data migration, like pricing. So if you have any sort of historical data migration going on, there's a historical data migration services fee, which I think we've put down as like $100 right now. So no matter how many devices or what devices you're migrating, that fee will be applied. There's a lot of site migrations where people don't care about that data, so that won't be applied then. But if you're doing historical data migrations, that'll be added, and we'll be very clear that that's part of our scope of work. No question about it.
That fee should be like $1,000.
Yeah, well, here's the thing, Colin. Let me follow up on that. So
Totally kidding, but
yeah, and that goes directly into Colin's pocket. The additional thing to note is that that does not include data extraction from the legacy provider. We will give historical data templates for the customer to fill out with standard units, timestamps, understanding of what the time zones should be, things like that. So they're going to give us the data on a plate. For that reason, it's not crazy expensive. If they want us to extract the data from the legacy provider, that will probably have to be priced out depending on the provider. Unfortunately, we will probably have an overall blanket fee for legacy providers that we've never worked with before, but that's something that we should be charging extra if the customer doesn't want to provide it. It's always best for the customer to provide it. So I would say always start with historical data migration services, and the proposal will be clear that we need to get the data in a particular format. Lastly, we will have a historical data migration services fee per device. So it's a very small fee, just like a device fee for live data, but that way we can kind of capture all the additional work that it takes for large projects with like 100 inverters versus a project with just 2. And this will probably change a little bit when we do like portfolio pricing. So this is, as mentioned, really focused on single project opportunities. So typically you'll have an opportunity with engineering services, site migrations, historical data migration services, and then skip 3 and go straight to 4 for the number of fees that we'll be migrating for historical data. In terms of hardware, we'll have 3 new product line items. We will be selling a loose 24-volt DC power supply, an RS-45 surge suppressor, and a 6-inch DIN rail. I don't think I need to explain the utility of those right now. I can get into them. But does anybody have any questions on these for the moment? These are all available in Salesforce and NetSuite as of today. Okay. Moving on. I've put together a few basic questions with some basic answers. These don't cover every single case, but should give you a good starting place. So first question is, do I need to supply a 24-volt DC power supply? If there's no power supply on the drawings, put it on the quote. If the customer says we don't need it, they will identify that. If there is a power supply shown on the drawings or the pictures, we should be able to identify if it's 24-volt DC. If it is not, again, we'll supply a 24-volt DC power supply. Pretty simple. Do I need to supply a cell modem? The Digi loose cell modem has been available for quite some time, so of course we can sell loose cell modem. I would say we should always suggest using a cell modem. There's a lot of reasons for it. It will make the installation a lot easier. Future support, with fleet ops will be a lot easier. And of course, the cell modem is not managed by anybody in particular. If the customer doesn't know who's managing that, or if it's through the legacy provider, that could always be turned off, right? And that's a pretty big risk. So a lot of our customers, in fact, realize, look, the cell modem could be a little bit expensive, and of course that's why we have to offer options without cell modems, but it's a huge part of the consistency of the data stream, so that needs to be considered. And of course, we'll make it easy. We don't need to ship an Elegate Extend with a cell modem in a box. We can ship a loose cell modem. We have a lot of different options that people can use. Third question, that you want to ask yourself is with regard to the existing DAS, are the majority of the data connections RT or TCP? Pretty much your normal, scoping questions for DAS at this point. How many serial inputs are there? How many daisy chains are on there? The rules of thumb I would apply here is for the first serial input, have an Aqua Suite. For any additional serial input, have an MGate. So far, so good, pretty standard. If we are not supplying a cell modem, I would actually strongly recommend, and there's really not a huge drawback to doing this, just adding on Aqua Suites rather than adding on MGates, and I'll explain why. When we're not supplying the cell modem and the LAN network connections are something that are an unknown, the MGates are not a great solution because the MGates require us to know the IP address ahead of time. The Aqua Suites we can set up on DHCP. They're very flexible, and pretty much, we can drop in additional Aqua Suites without too many issues in terms of space constraints. The configuration, if we're working with people on site, is not too difficult. So I would say if we were not managing the network, drop in an Aqua Suite instead of an MGate for any additional serial inputs. For any streams that are going over TCP, you can reuse network switches. We'll assume they're unmanaged. If they are managed, which means they have their own IP addresses and they get configured, AEs will provide feedback and see if we can reuse those or if we need to replace them with basically unmanaged switches. If there are existing gateways, loggers from the legacy provider, it's pretty tempting to use those to keep costs down. Generally, it's very difficult to reuse existing gateways, loggers, and converters or I/O devices. They have all sorts of behavior that we don't understand. If we want to reuse them, we need to log into them. It gets very complicated at that point. So using those should be the exception overall, but there are some standard ones that we can use. Aqua Suites, obviously standard for DEC. We can reuse those for DEC retrofits. Seeds, which is the SunEdison monitoring solution, the IOs, which are like the digital input-output devices for weather sensors, we can reuse those. Those are standard ones that we interface with. The SMA cluster controller, things that we already use in our fleet to capture data, we can reuse. So those are pretty much it. There isn't too much we can reuse in terms of existing loggers and RTU devices and such. Two last ones. Surge suppression is actually a pretty important topic, and I think up to this point we've been pretty lax with it. Surge suppression should always be a requirement, right? For a lot of reasons. We can have our stuff fail in the field, especially with a box we don't know very well. It becomes a huge warranty concern if like the AquaSuite shorts and we don't know if it was because of something down the line or maybe the installer actually hooked it up incorrectly in the panel. We should always supply surge suppression or have surge suppression. If there is surge suppression on site, we can reuse it after the AE reviews it. So if you see something that looks like a surge suppressor or want input as to whether or not it's a surge suppressor, ask us. If there isn't anything there, I would strongly recommend we supply surge suppressors. We have added it to Salesforce, and the reason for that is we can actually pre-wire them, and it becomes a little bit of a kit. So especially with the M gates, which are very difficult to hook up, the inputs are not very well labeled, and customers will get that wrong all the time. Surge suppressors are really easy, and if we have them pre-wired from DST, there will be like kits. They'll be a lot easier to deal with. So a lot of those polarity issues, labeling problems will be addressed just naturally by using surge suppressor. Lastly, when doing the site migrations, we'll come across a lot of devices we don't support. We should still, treat those devices like we would treat any normal device integration. Device integration fee, spec sheets, all that sort of thing. We'll follow that process and we'll work through it, but at least identify it's a new device and we can start to see what it would take to incorporate it. Any questions? All right. We can look into the forms in more detail, but I know people are a little short on time, and we can definitely have a follow-up discussion. I do realize there are quite a few things that we should probably look into to improve this process. So some things that I've thought of are, we should have streamlined processes for legacy providers in the short term. Once we are pretty solid with this process, which is really built around not knowing what we might encounter and really going through all the steps to make sure we have project success. With known players like Draker, SunEdison, ABB also, DEC, which we have done before, we can start to create different workflows and different processes and different documents that are more tailored towards them. So just do keep in mind, while the site migration process right now, it seems rigorous, and it's meant to be that way because site migrations are things that are risky. There's high sensitivity. People want low-cost solutions, so there's a lot of things we have to consider. We should be able to streamline this in the short term, and we'll be adding more and more providers to that list. We'll hopefully start to use Salesforce more for these forms, email notifications, contact lists. So of course, we'll be working with sales ops to incorporate Salesforce a little bit more, maybe tasks, activities tracked. And what we'll likely do is create an opportunity in Salesforce that is just for site migration. Like we'll have a site migrations type opportunity, we'll have a DAS type, DAS Salesforce opportunity type, and maybe one other. Very similar, but they'll have different behaviors, different fields, so we can start to tailor them to our needs. What we'd also like to do is work with sales to understand a lot of the time with site migrations, customers have existing functionality, existing expectations that are hard to capture. Sometimes we get in trouble because we'll lose a feature that a customer has been using for quite some time. Maybe they have a very special report that they like a lot and they're kind of stuck with. Trying to get that up front helps a lot to make sure that we set expectations. And if we need to charge for additional reporting services or data link creation, or at least scope that out, we can. So that isn't really something that's covered well in this process, so hopefully we can start to add that too with sales' help. Another big piece here that isn't covered, that has come up a couple of times, is reporting. So a lot of people do site migrations to have automated reporting, or they have existing reporting needs that they need to migrate. The reporting piece is very time sensitive. It's very data quality sensitive. It's very customer sensitive because it involves money. So that's one thing that we should probably consider incorporating into this overall process to figure out where does that fall in, where do we get the reporting to involve, start to capture that information ahead of time so that when we cut over, we understand what the deadline is and loop in the customer as to when we expect the data to be available for reporting again. We'd like to also implement QA of data in a more systemic and automated fashion. So right now, in the closeout email that I mentioned, the engineer is checking point by point to make sure that all the AC values from the inverters match the meter, phase by phase they match. It's quite tedious. It's prone to human error. Very soon, not just for site migrations, but also for regular DAS, we should have data link tools available to QA data automatically and put metrics together that just get emailed to the customer right away. So that should be a really great tool to incorporate and make this process a lot more scalable. Lastly, our drawing and collateral is very focused on packages, right? Elgate 360s, Elgate 320s. We should start to build out drawings that are more tailored towards loose equipment. Now, it doesn't affect sales very much, but it is a purely AE goal to make sure we represent drawings in a very good way, mostly for the client, but I think also for you guys to understand, like, okay, do I have one surge suppressor per device? Am I showing, no surge suppressors? We don't really have those details in the drawings yet. We have to realize that. We're going to try to improve that to make the loose equipment a little bit more clear, more representational about what we're actually shipping rather than a full package and symbols to kind of illustrate everything. So with that, I mean, that's pretty much it. I think it's pretty late on a Friday, so I don't know if you guys want to go through the forms, but wanted to just quickly open it up to any questions that you guys might have or concerns or places where you think we might want to expand and flesh out this process.
Not right now. I mean, I've had a few. I feel like they're each just very unique, so
Yep.
I don't think it's difficult to explain that to the client. That there's a lot of back and forth needed to keep it together.
Yeah, and you know what? I probably should go over the site migration proposal really quick and the site migration document. I don't think anyone's really seen that apart from Andy, so let me go ahead and take a quick look. Go ahead and grab those. Again, the in here.
I would just add, from what I've seen so far for both sides of this, AEs and sales, the more that we can control the expectation from day one on the customer side, the better. And I mean, while some of these could potentially be easy, there's always going to be hiccups from what I've seen so far. Maybe it was because there wasn't a process in place yet, but again, the more we can just kind of control them on timing, returns, the better.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, site migrations are difficult for two reasons. One, there's just a lot of unknowns. Two, we're relatively new to doing them, especially as a larger team. I think there's been very specialized and concentrated efforts to do site migration work, but up to this point, it hasn't really been like an offering that everyone's been trained up to at this point. So it will be hard in the beginning, but hopefully, just like when we started doing DAS, especially with people like you guys just doing DAS work for the first time, we'll start to get better at it. And especially on item number 2, that should start to be veterans and start to understand this process a lot better and what pitfalls are and be more cognizant of how to manage that more proactively. So just to really quickly go over the documents, since I do have them up, this is the site migration questionnaire I mentioned. It's a PDF with fields to input. It's very easy for the customer to fill this out, save it, and send it back. Covers when they want to do the work, what hardware's on site, again, what their needs are. That would be accompanied by the site migration survey, which again just breaks it down site by site, where the site is, do they have reporting requirements, is there a kiosk, is there existing internet, what is the hardware makeup existing on site, and almost one of the most important things, actually, forgot to mention, with any of this, if the project doesn't currently work with the devices on site, we should know that too, right? So that's actually a pretty big piece to capture. Now, with this information and with the opportunity filled out, the AE will start to put together a timeline. And the timeline will be pretty standard. I mean, generally, I'd say it's around 5 to 10 business days to get a proposal to a client from when we get the RFQ, depending on their turnaround time with that. Could be as quick as 5, but realistically, we've seen it take a couple weeks to finally get all the information we've been asking, even just to put a proposal together. Then from that state, the actual hardware lead times are a lot quicker. We put together an expectation with the clients that they need to call a certain amount of time ahead of time when they're on site. Historical data migrations might take about 10 days, that sort of thing. So we'll have standard lead times allocated to this, and the AE will fill out exactly when the milestones are, who's involved, and what the actual milestones are, and what do we need to complete those milestones. So that'll be on here. There's also some metadata tracked here in this document, which is mostly for AE purposes. But the idea is that we will share this document with the client during the kickoff call so that they always have access to it. We keep this updated, and everyone has the same visibility. If there are changes in the schedule, the AE will update the sheet to push dates out accordingly or readjust the dates with the client. If we need to meet the same deadlines, we need to kind of figure out what do we need to prioritize and what do we, what data do we need. But that should really be the exception. In a standard fashion, this should all flow. And if there are delays on the customer side, we might just need to shift things out a few days. So there will be tools to keep this up to date and have this be visible to the client. So all of that should really, hopefully, inform the site migration proposal. So this is very similar to SCADA proposal documentation, but it's a lot more simple. So it's just a template. It covers all the same things that we have in our SCADA documentation, but it talks a little bit about what the site migration entails, what platform is going to be once that carries over, what the project schedule and milestones are that will reflect the site migration document that the AE puts together in terms of timelines. It will also cover, in a very standard fashion, this shouldn't really be changed, what the different stages are, what the expectations are without timelines addressed, just kind of detailing what is exactly like, a technical design review, who needs to be in attendance, what is the expectation around commissioning support, what tools should they bring with them when they're doing commissioning, things of that nature. When we migrate the historical data, how do we expect the data to come to us? It should come already QA'd with bad data removed, otherwise we will upload the bad data as is. Talks about historical data migration services, what points do we typically pull in? Right now we only support AC power, AC energy, irradiance, and back module temperature. So all of that is covered here. There will probably be a price breakdown, which Zach or Jason can help you out. If you're doing portfolio work, that's something that we haven't really addressed in this proposal before, but we should address it in the proposal. If we have, standard like price chunks in the quote, we should explain exactly how we came to that price. And then lastly, some additional notes and considerations where we can have, again, like toolkits. We'll include the templates for the historical data that need to be filled out so they understand what the requirements are there. And then, of course, this comes accompanied by the quote and the drawing, so the customer understands really what the overall hardware solution is, what the price is, and what the expectations are and the timeline to get this completed. And so with the quote PO'd and this signed, we should be able to kick it off, and then the aide will bring that site migration document to the project's completion. So we'll pull all that back into here, which will be shared with the client and then updated as we go along.
Sounds good.
I don't think Eric's on the line anymore, so you guys good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Colin, any other closing remarks? Comments?
Nope. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. So hopefully we'll continue to refine this. We'll continue to improve, hopefully reduce the lead times so we can have like really quick turnaround time and get things addressed. But I think these expectations will just result in a better customer experience if we just know them right away, even if it's just a baseline for now. Great. Thanks a lot. Bye, guys.
Bye.